Welcome to this explainer. Let's dive right in and unpack how Makoto Yukimura systematically, completely dismantles the romanticized myth of the violent Viking warrior. I mean, from the outside looking in, Vinland Saga looks like your standard run-of-the-mill revenge quest, right? You have a young boy whose father is murdered, and he embarks on this grueling, decade-long bloodbath to avenge him. It's exactly the kind of hero's journey we've been told since stories existed. But what this brilliant series actually does is take that tired trope and completely turn it on its head. It uses the protagonist's life to show us exactly what happens when violence is literally the only language the world teaches a child.
So we're kicking things off with this completely baffling pacifist thesis from Thors, which drops us directly into the thematic heart of our whole analysis. Think about this for a second. Thors was arguably the greatest warrior who ever lived. He was a legendary Viking who could end a fight before it even started. But he realized something that most warriors never do. The truly strong have absolutely no need to kill. When he tells his young son Thorfinn that nobody in the entire world deserves to get hurt, he's planting a seed that is going to take decades and rivers of blood to finally bloom.
All right, part 1, the true warrior thesis, redefining strength.
Let's explore how the rest of the world defined a warrior versus Thor's radical, non-violent redefinition. This stark juxtaposition between brutal 11th century Norse society and Thor's deeply empathetic philosophy is just fascinating. In the Viking culture of the time, strength is proven by the sheer amount of damage you can inflict. Taking what you want through raids and murder, that's just seen as a matter of fact. It's a world where might literally makes right. But Thor's? He walked away from all of that. He packed up his family and chose a quiet life, genuinely believing that a true warrior resolves disputes through diplomacy, negotiation, and mercy, never by reaching for a sword.
Now, what's really interesting here is how ancient concepts actually align perfectly with Thor's belief that a warrior's intent matters way more than the fight itself. Take the Sanskrit term kshatriya. It describes a warrior who applies violence only as an absolute last resort, to protect citizens from injury, and it's completely devoid of personal ego or emotional attachment. Thor's embodied this perfectly. He hated violence, sure, but as we saw when his family was threatened, he didn't hesitate for a second to use his fists to defend them. He just made sure to disable his attackers without taking their lives.
Moving on to Section 2, A Prison of Revenge, the Misunderstood Lesson. Tragically, young Thorfinn completely misses the point of his father's lesson and just turns his entire life into a vessel of pure hatred. We see this build over a grueling decade. Thorfinn basically survives as a tool for Askeladd just to earn these duels that he inevitably loses anyway. You see, watching his pacifist father die without taking a single life in his own defense, 6-year-old Thorfinn draws exactly the wrong conclusion. He decides his father's mistake was being too soft. So, to avenge a man who actively rejected violence, Thorfinn becomes the most violent thing in any given room. He abandons his family and spends 11 years running brutal mercenary missions for Askeladd, the very man who murdered his dad.
The undeniable truth is that his revenge quest wasn't heroic at all. It was a self-imposed prison built entirely around Askeladd. Thorfinn is essentially eating from the hands he swore to cut off. He sustains the life of his enemy because his enemy's death is literally the only future he can even imagine. He isn't living for himself anymore. His entire personality, his every waking moment, is structurally dependent on his hatred for this one single man.
Which brings us to Section 3, Total Identity Collapse, the void left behind.
Everything completely shatters when Askeladd sacrifices himself to save Wales, intentionally dying by Prince Canute's sword instead of Thorfinn's. Stripped of his one and only target, Thorfinn is just left staring into this terrifying void. Askeladd orchestrated his own death on his own terms to protect his homeland. And by denying Thorfinn the duel he craves so badly, Askeladd effectively kills the warrior Thorfinn. In the space where a decade of pure hatred used to live, there is suddenly nothing but total silence.
And this explains perfectly why Thorfinn doesn't just ride off into the sunset as a hero upon his enemy's death. Instead, he devolves into an empty, lifeless slave. This isn't just depression being used as a handy plot device, it's textbook psychological identity collapse. Thorfinn never really had a self. He had a target. Without Askeladd, he has no interests, no relationships, absolutely no hopes. When we find him later, sold as an agricultural slave in Denmark, he doesn't resist. He doesn't try to plan an escape. He barely even registers it when someone draws a blade on him. He is entirely hollowed out. Now, in a really fascinating subversion, the glorious Viking afterlife is transformed here into a horrifying meat grinder of inescapable violence. In his sleep, Thorfinn is relentlessly tortured by the faces of everyone he ever murdered.
He dreams of this beautiful, peaceful field that suddenly just fills with the rotting corpses of his victims, and they're dragging him down into an abyss. Yukimura completely strips away the myth of the golden halls of Valhalla, revealing it as an endless, agonizing cycle of men just killing each other forever. And acting as his grim psychological guide is none other than Askeladd, forcing Thorfinn to acknowledge his sins and urging him to climb out of that sea of blood.
Okay, Section 4, Building from the Dirt, Atonement on Ketil's Farm.
Sold into slavery in Denmark, Thorfinn hits absolute zero and has to begin the incredibly grueling process of rebuilding his humanity. Realizing he can't just apologize to the dead and move on, Thorfinn accepts these massive mandates to construct a new life based on creation rather than destruction. You see, guilt alone doesn't actually repair shattered lives. The only option left for Thorfinn is to carry the weight of his victims and ensure that every life he took becomes the foundation for a new, peaceful purpose. He has to dedicate his life to abolishing the very things that created him in the first place, war and slavery.
The quiet, repetitive work of farming sharply contrasts the chaotic bloodshed of his youth. Working the land alongside his fellow slave, Einar, becomes this beautiful physical metaphor for Thorfinn's internal rebirth. He's out there clearing the literal forest while simultaneously uprooting the weeds of his own violent programming. For the first time, he begins to find joy in creation, in the ingenuity of a plow, in growing food that sustains life, rather than wielding a blade that ends it.
Moving to Section 5, The Strength of Pacifism, the Ultimate Test.
Thorfinn's newfound peaceful philosophy is pushed to its absolute limit when King Canute's forces threaten to invade the farm. To earn an audience with the king and stop the invasion without shedding any blood, Thorfinn absorbs 100 physical punches. 100. He stands right there before Canute's heavily armed guard and allows himself to be brutally beaten, absorbing every single blow without flinching and without ever raising a hand to fight back. In a culture where answering violence with violence is the absolute law, this scene is incredibly unsettling to the hardened warriors watching it happen.
Ultimately, his refusal to fight back isn't weakness. It's the full realization of his father's philosophy weaponized against Viking culture. It requires absolute certainty of who you are to choose peace in a society that literally reads peace as cowardice. Standing there, battered and bloody, he repeats the words his father told him all those years ago. Notice, he doesn't say, "I forgive my enemies." He says he has none. By removing the concept of an enemy entirely, he completely unplugs the very machinery that justifies raids, slavery, and war.
Section 6. The Utopia Paradox, Two Paths to Peace.
This incredible endurance leads to a philosophical showdown between two men trying to save the world, but from completely opposite ends. We see a massive clash of ideologies here. Canute's tyranny for the sake of order versus Thorfinn's radical refusal to participate in the cycle. King Canute believes God has abandoned humanity, right? So he thinks he must create a paradise on Earth by wielding absolute power, using assassinations and military might to basically force a violent world into submission. Thorfinn, on the other hand, knows that fighting the system with violence just keeps the Valhalla wheel turning. His answer? Run away. He wants to sail to Vinland, completely beyond the reach of the crown, effectively weaponizing retreat in a culture that deeply shames it.
But characters like Hild prove that true atonement is an active, heavy burden, not just some sudden change of heart. As Thorfinn sets out to build his peaceful utopia, he is stalked by Hild, an inventor whose father Thorfinn actually assassinated during his decade of blood. With a crossbow constantly aimed right at his back, she serves as a very vocal, living reminder of the lives he shattered. She validates his redemption. If his pacifism holds weight when tested by someone who has every right to end his life, well then it is truly authentic.
Yukimura officially redefines the concept here, shifting the true warrior from one who takes life to one who relentlessly protects it. Through Thorfinn's incredible character arc, we learn that the violent warrior identity is actually the easy way out. Think about it. When the world is loud and threatening, matching its violent frequency is simple. But choosing to build where you burned, to plant where you reaped, and to forgive what you can't undo, that is the mark of a true warrior.
I absolutely love this quote. Yukimura even breaks the fourth wall to deliver this hilarious but pointed message, completely rejecting fans who just want more bloodshed. In an interview, he addressed readers who complained that Thorfinn became soft or that the story got boring when the fighting stopped. He unapologetically stated that if you're only here for the violence, he is not going to meet your expectations. His ultimate message is anti-war, hoping to inspire a generation that will flat out refuse to hold a gun even if ordered to by those in power.
So we'll wrap up by leaving you with this profound question about how you choose to confront conflict in your own life. Vinland Saga doesn't just entertain us, it forces us to evaluate our own responses to anger and injustice. It challenges us to stop equating damage with strength and asks us if we have the courage to clear the weeds in our own minds. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and I'll see you in the next one.